Hey there, this is Natalie, and today I want to talk about a ReZero theory, which is something I haven't done for a while. This is in response to a recent video by JakeZ123, where he talked about the fact that Return by Death seems to be acting strangely in the most recent arcs. Now, this isn't a response in the sense of I want to argue with his points or anything like that. It's more that his video raised a question, and I want to theorise about what the answer to that question might be. This is a theory relating to Arc 7, so there will be spoilers right up to the most recent Arc 7 chapters. So, I won't recap everything that was in Jake's video. It is linked in the description and you should definitely check it out for context around this theory. But the point was that while in Arcs 1 to 4, so what we've seen in the anime, Subaru always gets a decent amount of time to solve the problems that lead to his various deaths. From Arc 5 onwards, this no longer seems to be the case. He suggests that something has changed in Subaru or in Return by Death itself since the time skip between Arcs 4 and 5. That means that Return by Death is perhaps in some way broken or less effective. Now, this was something I'd previously just put down to Tappei wanting to create tenser situations and less repetition of events as the story went on. That would be a reasonable thing for him to want to do to keep things interesting, and as the audience becomes familiar with the mechanic. And since it's never been revealed exactly how Subaru's checkpoints are determined, Tappei does currently have the freedom to make them less favourable to Subaru, without it breaking any previously established logic about the ability. However, as Jake points out in his video, Tappei actually has Subaru notice the change in how Return by Death seems to be working within the narrative, and question whether or not the authority has been in some way compromised. If it was kind of a meta choice on the author's part, he wouldn't draw the audience's attention to it through Subaru, so this suggests that it does mean something in the story. So, if we assume that Return by Death is broken or compromised, then what could be the reason? Well, I do have a theory, but it actually contradicts Jake's observation that the change to Return by Death started after the 1-year time skip before Arc 5. See, Arc 5 is the first time we see Subaru have a very tight loop, rather than having hours or even days to do things differently, as he did in Arcs 1 to 4. Arc 5 doesn't have Subaru using Return by Death very often, because it shows us a lot of things happening around the city of Pristella from different characters' points of view, and it's rare to show scenes Subaru isn't in if they're going to be undone by a Return by Death. This means that there's only one death loop in Arc 5, and it's when we first learn that the Sin Archbishops are in the city. In the first loop, Subaru leaves Beatrice in a park, where they encountered everyone's favourite character Liliana, and finds that Sirius, the Sin Archbishop of Wrath, is doing crazy Sin Archbishop stuff that leads to everyone in a town square being killed by her authority. I'm being brief with the recap here because it's not really the point of the video. When Subaru dies here, he's returned to just 15 minutes or so earlier, back to the park with Beatrice. Now, this is the first short loop we see, but I don't actually think this loop is the first loop that's strange compared to the others. Subaru is returned to a point where he's safe, and where he has enough time to make a decision that will prevent his death. Basically, he can just avoid going to where Sirius is. He can stay in the park or go somewhere else, and Sirius will still end up killing the kids she's taken hostage and the rest of the people, but Subaru would be safe. Subaru doesn't do this because he wants to save the people, but we already know that Satella, who we can only assume is controlling Return by Death, doesn't give him this ability so he can save randos or sacrifice himself. So this would be an acceptable save point as far as she was concerned. So while the shortness of this loop could be an indicator of something, it doesn't really seem like a true malfunction. It doesn't return Subaru to a point where he's currently in danger, and for Satella, whose goal is to have Subaru be able to survive and get past the obstacles, there really wouldn't be any advantage to returning him to an earlier point in time. Now, the reason I think that's important is that my theory about what causes the strange loops later on, such as the loop in Guaral where Subaru is killed by Todd repeatedly, and the loop where Olbart kills everyone and Subaru returns to just moments before, relates to something that happens after the loop with Sirius in Arc 5. That is, Subaru receiving the cursed dragon blood from Capella. I'll come back to the loops in Arc 6 and the first loop in Arc 7 where Subaru returns to just after Rem attacks him, because I think there are other ways the shortness of these loops can be explained too. But think about the last loop we see that seems fairly normal and gives Subaru some time. It's the loop in the Valakian camp. In the final iteration of this loop, Subaru ends up in the Sudrak camp and fights the Elgina with Vincent. After this, his hand regrows as a result of the cursed dragon blood, and in the web novel version at least, I don't know how this was changed in the light novels, there is a description while this is happening of the two curses in Subaru's body conflicting and trying to find some kind of balance. These two curses are the dog bite curse from Arc 2, which, remember, was never removed, it just wasn't activated so it didn't kill him, and the cursed dragon blood from Arc 5. I think that this talk about the curses, and the reminder that the dog bite curse is still a thing, is there to indicate that having these two conflicted curses, one from a witch beast and one from a dragon, is doing something strange to Subaru, and it's not something he himself might put together or be aware of. The next loop is the Guaral one, which is the first time that, in my opinion, there is no convincing explanation for why the save point isn't earlier than it is, other than return by death no longer working as intended. The save point places him in immediate danger. There's no obvious means of escape, even if he was willing to let other people die, and there also wasn't anything that happened right before that could have been seen as clearing an obstacle, causing the checkpoint to update to that moment. The loop in Chaos Flame is the same, and I don't mean the death loop in the most recent chapter, because I think that's down to Al's authority kicking in before Return by Death would have, but the loop prior to that, when Olbart kills everyone. Subaru had both of these curses in his body through all of Arc 6, but after that Elgina fight where the cursed dragon blood effectively activates to heal his arm, is when the loops get really out of control. So, in Arc 6 we do get some short loops. The first is when Subaru is sniped by Shaola, but I think this could also be explained in a different way. If Subaru's save point gets updated after he clears an obstacle and then can't be set to further back in time again, the fact that this happens during a sequence of clearing different obstacles to reach the Pleiades watchtower may still mean Return by Death is working as it always has. The next significant Arc 6 loop is not unusually short, but takes Subaru back to the point where he gets amnesia, and the one after that takes him to after returning from the Hall of Memories. I think in these cases, these just make sense, because the Hall of Memories is outside of normal time and space, so it would get very weird if he was able to redo interactions with it, just as he's never able to redo the Witches' Tea Parties in Arc 4. The first loop in Arc 7 is short too, but if we think about it from Satella's perspective, she certainly wouldn't return him to before she teleported him to Valakia, for whatever reason she did that, and may consider returning him to after Rem ran away to be a safer moment than before Rem tried to strangle him, especially considering Rem took Louis Arneb with her. It was going to be a short loop either way then, and he's still returned to a moment where he's safe, and can choose to simply avoid going into the forest where he was killed by the hunter, making it similar to the situation in Arc 5. So, these loops are mostly short and a bit strange, but there is still a way to explain the shortness of every loop prior to the fight with the Elgina, and there are still some longer, more normal seeming loops mixed in. But after the thing with the curses, that's when the loops start to seem illogical, Like there's no reason why those would be the save points that Satella would want for Subaru. And that's basically my theory. Having the two curses in him as of the confrontation with Capella in Arc 5 is the cause of Return by Death acting strangely, and these issues really started to present themselves fully after Subaru's arm regrew in Arc 7, which is where these curses were really discussed as having any kind of interaction with each other in the narrative. The whole curse thing could become quite significant in other ways too. For instance, it's quite odd that despite being away from Beatrice for quite some time now, Subaru's mana poisoning condition has not come up. Could the strange curse situation be doing something to suppress that, maybe? Is Satella's appearance at the end of the most recent chapter just because she couldn't see Subaru while he was stuck in the death loops made by Owl's authority? Or is she perhaps becoming frustrated that Return by Death is working strangely and has decided to intervene more directly in keeping Subaru alive? What really is the deal with the cursed dragon blood anyway, and why does it seem to be beneficial to Subaru in contrast to how it affected Crush? So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments what you think about this theory, and make sure you check out Jake's video if you want to go deeper into this whole thing of Return by Death being broken and come up with your own ideas about what might be happening. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon and to everyone who helps me out by subscribing and watching my videos. Thank you for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.